this housing topic for us is one of the key priorities. We have, I just became the chair July 1st, so I'm 6 months in, almost 6 months, yeah, I know, almost 6 months in, and so I'm learning about the process and how it all works. But you get to establish 4 priorities, and housing is one of our top priorities, along with public sector engagement, diversity, and technology. So if any of those sound interesting to you and you're not a ULI member, you should raise your hand and come see Kendra Chandler. She's our executive director, and we'll sign you up. Those are hot topics for our region for sure. We're Orange County and Inland Empire. So housing is key, and because what ULI does is an education component, we don't lobby, we join the forces. So we have a public sector task force that we started this go-round that is going to, needless to say, the cities, some of the cities, I don't know if there's any city people here, there might be a couple. I met the mayor of Dana Point, so I know he's here. This whole RHNA topic is scary, and so ULI has the opportunity, because we have disciplines from across the development world in our district council, and we help to join the public sector and what public sector is all about with the builders and developers. And by joining the two, educating, letting them understand what the other one is dealing with, we're hoping that ULI can provide a platform. We do technical advisory panels that you can do in the cities that will help on a project. We also do an urban plan educational exercise that's a fantastic, we're the only organization that I know of that has this educational component that teaches kids at an early age. We've now adapted one to public officials, urban plan for public officials. So it's an effort to raise the knowledge of the public sector as well as raise the exposure from the builders and developers. And hopefully, we'll hear our panel today, but hopefully by educating, these solutions will kind of come to the forefront. So we totally want to thank you for allowing us to be a sponsor. And if anyone is ever interested in joining the Urban Land Institute, our district council is Orange County and Inland Empire. So we go out all the way to the Inland Empire and we cover all of Orange County. So if you're ever interested, feel free to call me. Thank you so much, and I'm so looking forward to hearing what our panel has to say. Our panel has 2 ULI members, and our moderator is a staunch, active ULI member, so I'm very proud to have people representing ULI on the table. So thank you so much, and enjoy the program. Thank you.
Good afternoon. That was very weak. So I'm Mike Ruane, and so we need better audience participation. The Rancho Mission Viejo is fired up, so we're very happy to see that. So as many of you have discerned, I'm not Alexa Washburn. Unfortunately, she caught the flu that is going around, and you are stuck with me for the panel. So, but I did want to say this is a very special program. It's been in the works for some time. There is probably no more visible position than Orange County Forum in terms of showcasing this hot issue. It's something on everyone's mind. Many of you saw the polls over the holidays that either homeless and housing are the #1 issues from a public policy standpoint, not just in the LA region, but in California. So we're very fortunate. And to really give that issue that it's due, we are fortunate, and we'll be calling up the panelists right now, so please be ready, to have Assembly Member Sharon Quirk Silver join us today on the panel. Sharon Quirk Silva represents the 65th Assembly District in Orange County in the State Assembly. She was first elected in 2012. She is also, what's not in her biography as often, she's one of our housing champions in the state legislature, serving on the Assembly Housing Committee, and takes the time, and I've seen firsthand, to facilitate workshops and sessions of districts on how cities can access those resources. Next, we have Susan Horry, who is a land use partner and Orange County administrative partner for Manat. Susan joining us. Susan Horry's practice focuses on land use development and compliance with the various state and federal environmental regulations that development has to deal with, so it's a very timely topic. She's also a member of the Orange County Forum Board, so we're very happy to have her in addition to her ULI membership. She is a recognized national and state authority on environmental law and land use regulation. And last but not least, Paul Johnson, who brought his own booster section from Rancho Mission Viejo. Paul Johnson is Executive Vice President for Community Development at Rancho Mission Viejo. That's that small piece of property down south there.
Wow.
And Paul's responsible for the design and implementation of master plan communities for a future village encompassing up to 14,000 residential units and 5 million square feet of commercial property. This cross-section is really something that we're very excited about, so we're going to go ahead and kick off the panel. To set the table for this panel, some of you may have read in the newspaper or you've heard on radio or TV that recently the Southern California Association of Governments, which is the metropolitan planning organization for Southern California and the 6 counties, recently announced that Orange County will be allocated 180,000 new housing units over the next 8 years. And to put that in perspective, that is more housing units that exist today in the city of Irvine. That is a huge number. And so one of the first things the panel is going to all address as a theme, but then there's specific questions. How is Orange County going to meet these housing requirements? That's a massive amount. It came out of a regional needs assessment process. Many of you may be aware, but the other counties in the region in Southern California decided to vote to allocate more housing units to Orange County, basically because the jobs are here. And so that is something that went through a contentious process because ultimately it is a political decision of an allocation within the region. So kicking off for the panels, I'm going to have a question for each of you to kick it off. I'm going to start with Assembly Member Quirk Silva to see what do you think is available to Orange County to help solve, and what tools the state is offering to solve this massive need.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. This is not an easy one word or one sentence answer. Obviously, housing is an issue that we all should be concerned about. We all need homes, different, of course, price ranges. We've been talking about homelessness more and more. But this didn't just suddenly happen over the last handful of years. It kind of crept up on Orange County. Other large cities have dealt with this or not dealt with it, meaning San Diego or San Francisco or Los Angeles. But the truth is, the one word I would say is we have to build. We have to build more housing, and we have to build a lot of it. So if you are an Orange County elected leader and you think it's too much, I guess my question back to you would be, what are the consequences of not building? And we see those on our corners, and we see them this last year. Over 400 people died in Orange County being homeless on our streets. So those are not, my answer is maybe an answer you might not like to hear, but the truth is that if we don't have homes for people, they're going to be homeless. And we're not going to be able to fill those jobs that we need, and that's all sectors. So whether it's hospitality, whether it's retail, all of those sectors need workers. And assuming workers want to come in from the Inland Valley, an hour and a half on the freeway, is not likely.
Thank you. Susan, how does the regulatory environment impact housing construction? We have this great need. The Assembly member has stated it's a matter of state priority, but how does the regulatory environment impact the ability to produce housing?
Well, I think everybody knows that CEQA has always been a very difficult tool in terms of having to get through that process, and it can add tremendous amount of time as well as expenses for developers to get through the local entitlement process and the opportunity CEQA provides for project opponents. And basically, in many of these situations, we're talking about NIMBYs, to either sue to slow down or stop housing and housing developments from occurring. I want to talk a little bit about the RHNA numbers and then talk about the challenge in terms of just what this means for our cities. As Mike mentioned, the overall number for Orange County. But for that number means broken down to individual cities. Newport Beach, for example, has to find 4,800 new units. Costa Mesa, 11,000, over 11,000 units, and Huntington Beach, over 13,000 units. And so that's a tremendous amount of housing that needs to be provided. There have been some legislative efforts to try and promote housing, but in many of those situations, they've provided an exemption for CEQA, but those legislations and the regulatory environment really has focused on affordable housing, transitional housing, shelters, and homeless, and not necessarily what we would call the market rate housing. And in fact, one of the things that we also have to remember is that the RHNA numbers that Mike mentioned don't mean necessarily just market rate housing. We're talking about needing to provide both housing for very low income, and moderate income families, which means that could be anywhere from 50% of the median income, which in Orange County is about $90,000, to 120%. That's the moderate income families. So it's really a challenge to be able to find the mechanisms and the financing to do that. When we lost redevelopment, during the Brown administration, I think that was a huge tool that helped bring a lot of workforce housing and affordable housing to the market, and now that's gone. So I think that the regulatory environment is incredibly challenging. There are other changes that are happening, which I'll go into probably in another question, because I want to get some of the other, get Paul to also talk about things. But I do want to mention one thing that the legislature enacted both last year and this year in two bills. One is SB 35, which allowed for certain types of housing projects to get ministerial approval, which means that cities cannot exercise any discretion, and the good thing is that it's not subject to CEQA. But there are so many criteria that have to be met that I think it's very difficult for projects in Orange County to fall within it, and it also requires those projects to be constructed using prevailing wage. And I think Paul could probably talk about the impact of a prevailing wage requirement on projects. There is also a new legislation that just got signed by the governor in October called SB 330, where if a project is consistent with the general plan and zoning, it imposes restrictions on the agencies, the local agencies that are reviewing these applications. It sets a certain period of time in which they have to act. It requires that fees be frozen based upon the time of the application, and limits the amount of hearings that they can have. So I think that it's a mechanism to try and incentivize more housing, but on the flip side, it does impose, certain handcuffs on local agencies, and I think right now we want to incentivize them as opposed to penalize them.
So Paul, they've painted a picture and a landscape of tremendous housing need, demand, and regulatory environment that is overlaid there. From your perspective, what are the realities and challenges of actually building in today's marketplace?
Okay, so I have a couple quick answers, but before this picture, my executive assistant loves that. I'm going to have to take it out of her toolkit. It's a little, a few years older, but here we go. I'll have to get it updated. Well, a couple of things. So, we're entitled for 14,000 units. At the end of next year, we'll be through about 4,000 of that. So we're really doing all we can to meet the RHNA. And I spent some time with Jay, who works with us, to ask how is this going to impact us. And the reality is, and this is a 5-year program, we really probably won't get looked to increase our entitlement, and to do so, given the regulatory conditions and all that we'd have to go through, almost impossible. We wouldn't open up, our entitlement was accomplished in '04, to reopen up CEQA, to go back, unless the state or somebody was holding our hand and clear the path and make it just as simple as eating pie. We're going to stay on course. We're going to get our 14,000 units on the ground probably in the next 10 to 15 years. Is there a possibility in 15, 20 years out that we will have underutilized land, either probably non-residential that may not all get developed? It's always there to be converted, but it comes at the cost of getting it re-entitled. And re-entitlement in California is not something we want to do. So we're going to stay the course, and our goal, I'll preview a little later, we are going to address as we move forward into our next big planning area, whether you call it affordability or attainability. That is our focus, is to bring back market rate housing for the young folks that want to stay here in the county and make this home. So we're on the right focus, and we're going to try to get out in the market here soon.
So Paul, going back to you before we go back to the panelists, you also are very active and a leader in the Building Association. Where do you see the market? You know, a lot of people are prognosticating that there's going to be a slowdown. What do you see ahead?
So we listen to a lot of experts out there, and it's been a confusing time for any one of them to try to really say what is ahead in the next 2-3 years. I think there is still a consensus that 2021 will be slower. Some call it a hiccup. Some call it, a mild depression, recession. But nobody is looking at anything that's going to be drastic to the housing market. We closed out this year with about 260 houses left to go. So we're community developers, so all of our land has been committed. We're now working with our builders to get their homes sold. We believe the market in 2020 will stay strong enough to move through one new product, which the new home company will open up first quarter, and then about 200 remaining houses in existing projects. It's definitely going to get slower as we head into 20. Some are saying by the end of 20, we'll see a couple of months where it actually might be negative. But everyone's saying as we get to 21 and head into 22, absent we don't have a geopolitical event or something that we can't see, the county will, the country will come back. It'll be sort of at the bottom of the curve and beginning to come back up again. So timing's everything. We're trying to get back out in the market in early 22.
Great. Assembly member, you have the vantage point of looking at both the statewide and regional perspective. What tools do you see coming available from the state, or what is the state going to focus on in 2020? We've heard about what was passed, but what do we see ahead?
Well, again, there's going to be multiple, I think, efforts. One of the things that I think you heard already is if the state, in some ways, whether you want to call it an incentive or you want to call it a carrot and a hammer, you have seen that play out in the last year, and you're going to see it more. So I know some of you are going, see, I told you so. The state's telling us what to do. But the truth is that local governments haven't been saying yes to housing. They have not been saying yes. Many, many projects are denied. I come from local government, 8 years on council. We say in the latest poll, housing is one of the #1 priorities. We saw 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago when we actually did a survey in my district, and people actually wrote in homelessness as one of the top priorities. So the public is seen many times more in interfacing than some of us actually do ourselves, depending on where they live. My district goes all the way from Cypress to Stanton, all the way to North Fullerton, so very diverse district. So again, when we're talking about local government, we're saying, well, they still want to have their voice heard. And when they appreciate what the state does, then it's usually stay out of our way. But if they don't like what the state wants to do, then it's like you're telling us what to do. So you can't, on redevelopment, one of the things that we saw through the state is some cities did an excellent job with redevelopment. Other cities did nothing. They took the 20% set aside and did not build affordable housing. And then other cities turned their entire city into redevelopment. So that was taken away, and now it's, well, we can't build because we don't have it. But we weren't building when we did have it. So sometimes the narratives change depending on how you want it to change. And then the numbers as far as Costa Mesa, 14,000, or Newport, 4,000. If every city did their share, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. And pushing homeless from one city to another, or pushing RENA numbers from one city to another. Do you know how many times I've heard, well, let's just build in La Habra? That kind of is LA, so let's just build in La Habra. Oh, well, there's Tim. Sorry. Tim, what do you think? Let's just, or on the homeless, let's just, this is what I've literally heard over and over. Let's just put them on a bus, send them out to the desert, or let's build in San Bernardino, because everything's cheaper there and they really won't mind. But have you asked the people that live there? So these are not solutions. They're simply just a comment. We don't want them here. But when we talk about building, we have to build at all levels. And affordable housing is not just your lowest level, it's millennials. I mean, an average house is over $600,000, and if you do the math, you have to make a lot of money to make that happen. Most of our kids graduating from college are not making that money, so they have to work further and further and further. So this isn't just about homeless people. It's about building the county in the future to have jobs, and with those jobs, we need somewhere for them to live. So I get really animated about this because we have to do better. We have to lead the state, and we can lead the state, but we can't keep pushing it to somebody else. Well, let's put it all in Fullerton. I just read a letter from, sorry, I don't know who's here, but South County mayors who said, well, why should we have to build shelters when there's beds up north, like in Fullerton or in Santa Ana? So what if we wrote that same letter, North County, and said, why don't we put it all in Newport or Huntington? How do you think that would sound?
So,
Buzz killer.
many things come to mind, but it is the holiday season. So, but I think, Assemblymember, I think you put it out there in the terms it should be. It's a very difficult public policy issue, but it's real. I think 10 years ago was more people at conferences and others just talking about it. So Susan, turning back to you, in addition to feeling that they cannot handle the needs, every city at times says they're built out. Mm-hmm. So what creative solutions and opportunities are there to build more housing in built out cities?
Well, and I think the Assemblywoman is correct in terms of all the different mandates that have occurred. And the issue about housing is such a difficult one, and it's one that we've been dealing with for years. I remember when Senator Dunn was in the legislature, and we were at a ULI presentation, and he was talking about a housing legislation that he had enacted, and he said part of the reason why the legislature has to act is because, in a way, we give cover to the local agencies, and telling, because the local agencies have so much pressure from their constituencies about density. Density has become such a bad word, the D word, in land use and in housing. And in one sense, I think some of the legislation that we've talked about is really to provide some cover, some reason for the local decision makers to be able to push back against some of the pressure that they feel from their residents, their constituents, their voters who don't want to see density. So in terms of where developers should be looking at, where do we put the housing, I think that obviously in urban areas is probably one of the things that we need to look at, already developed areas, because then you avoid going into greenfields. You're dealing with issues of sustainability. One of the things that we're looking at, and I know a number of builders are looking at, is using shopping malls. When you look at an aerial of Orange County, or when you fly into John Wayne, you see a lot of gray areas, which is basically parking lots for business centers, parking lots for shopping malls, and I think that those are one of the things that we have to look at, is utilizing those parking lots, building parking structures, and as much as people hate to put their cars in parking structures if they're at the mall, they'd rather just find surface parking, building parking structures, and then putting housing within those areas, because those areas are already developed. There's a circulation grid pattern around them that serves that development. And it provides opportunities for upbuilding without really going into some of the residential neighborhoods. Santa Ana, for example, just recently approved, I want to say about over 1,000, maybe close to 2,000 units at Main Place. And so that is one of the places I think that we have to look at, as well as some recycling, some industrial areas. Newport Beach is a good example, right down the road here. You have the residences that went in where the Jazz Semiconductor site is, and that's another example of recycling property and building denser development in an area that's already used to dense development because you have office towers surrounding it. So I think that those are some of the things that we have to look at. I think I'm going to say one more thing about that. And the reason why you have to look at some of those infill urban areas is because one of the things that we aren't talking about is that in July of 2020, CEQA is going to require that when we look at traffic impacts, that it be looked at in the guise of vehicle miles traveled, not necessarily reducing congestion and making sure that the intersections flow and that we have enough street capacity, but we're going to be looking at traffic impacts in the guise of vehicle miles traveled, and you have to reduce your vehicle miles traveled by about 15%. And the only way you're going to do that is to build near transit and build near areas where you can access those transit locations or use the existing grid pattern as opposed to building out where there's going to be, your residents are going to, take longer and put miles on their car to get to their jobs.
Thank you. So, Paul, we've heard from the Assembly member why this is important, we need to do it. We heard from Susan where we can do it, but we haven't heard what type of housing and who are we building for. You know, there's a lot said about, well, millennials are renters. They're not going to buy houses, or this age demographic. So what is the reality? Who are you building for, and what is the demand out there?
So then we've been talking about millennials, I don't know, for 8 years, and I think they all got it wrong. They're just a little delayed. They're all moving into the housing industry. Today, they're beginning to be first-time buyers, but you have to get the housing right. You got to get the cost right. So currently, we have 4,000 houses on the ground. About 30% of our buyers have been millennials. And we know that because we track all of our buyer segments through a group called Kantar and Mindbase. So if you get the formula right, which is about lifestyle, and we're in suburbia, we're not in, downtown Irvine, and we're doing quite well to attract a major amount of them. Our focus as we go forward to solve this problem is to really look at affordability or attainability, as we like to call it, and we're moving to density. So here we are out in the south part of the county. You'd think we'd be building 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot lots. Our first phase of the new village, which will open up in early '22, is coming in at about 23 units to the acre. Because it's only by getting that type of density and paying attention to the level of architectural execution that we can make the formula work both for us to move land and for our builders to be able to really price the product right. So we'll open up, we're currently, I wish we were further down the road. We've got 7 products in land deal construction or making right now. We'll have those deals done in the next 2 weeks, and we'll make an announcement to get to this grand opening in '22. We really will, it'll be very different down in Rancho Mission Viejo, but that's what it's going to take, and we get to set the stage. So the great thing is, we don't have surrounding neighbors. We're working with the County of Orange. We have very flexible zoning that allows us to move our density through the project as we need to move it. And I think for the next 3 to 5 years, it is going to be about density. It's about creating a great place where our young folks, whether it's the millennials today, the Gen Zs, and the ones that are coming, I think it's the centennials, they've got them all named out. We have to pay attention to that, and then we have to work cooperatively with our builders, or otherwise, our builders will disappear from this county. A comment on the prevailing wage, and we always find it really frustrating where it's all about getting the price right, construction right, it all drops to our bottom line, which is the land residual, and then they come along with ideas like a residential prevailing wage, which literally, if that were to come to be, construction for residential construction will go up 15 to 20% overnight. And that all comes out of the price of the house. It doesn't come off the builder's profitability. It won't come out of our land value, or why are we building if we're not making a profit? So I think at some point, we're going to have colliding forces that people have to pay attention to get to a formula where housing can get on the ground at the right price for the people coming behind us.
Thank you. And as the tradition Orange County Forum, we have audience Q&A, but before we do that, we're going to go around robin and first ask each of you to describe or how you would pick one word or one theme that you would describe the housing outlook for 2020. Assembly member, we'll start with you.
Challenging. I continue to believe that when we have critical issues, they're going to be challenging. We're not going to just have a scenario where everything falls into place. So I think it's going to take a lot of hard work, and it's going to take the will to build the housing that we need. But I do want to thank you, because that density is really important. You know, in most cities, if you're going up over 3 to 4 stories, people really have a hard time with that. And there's a lot of outcry that it's too high. We don't want to be like Los Angeles, or I just got back from Korea, so if you want to talk about density, we're talking 30 stories and millions of people. But we did not see one homeless person. So, you know, that's something to think about. But 2 other places where we might find some relief or some opportunity for housing. One is the state moved forward on several bills to encourage accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, or mother-in-law type of homes, and it should not only give some incentives with reducing fees, but also they don't have to be owner occupied. And then surplus properties, local city property and state property, to really start to look at developing on those sites. So with the challenge, I think there's opportunity.
Wonderful. Susan, you're...
Well, she took my challenging
Okay.
word, but I would say evolving. I think that over the next year and the coming years, I think the housing market is going to continue to evolve. It's going to have to adapt to a lot of the environmental challenges that we have. We're still dealing with how to deal with greenhouse gas issues. We've got climate change. We have, as I said, the new VMT, Vehicle Miles Traveled standard, that's going to be worked into environmental review. I think there's always challenges in building on the coast in terms of sea level rise and managed retreat. So there is going to be a lot of evolving in terms of where cities are going to be looking at putting their housing, the density issues, and how they develop the communities so that we do have mixed uses. You have retail, you have job centers, and you have housing, all within close proximity to each other. And it's probably not going to be your grandmother or your mother or father's suburban neighborhood. I think it is going to be evolving to meet these environmental issues.
Thank you. Paul?
So I would use the word focused, and by that I mean, I think it's a time when, whether you're a community developer or a land developer or a builder, you're really having to reassess how you go forward. And some of what you've been doing in the past isn't going to work. And so how fast can you turn the company in a direction which will actually solve or meet the needs of the home buying public which we're trying to reach out to? Apartments are going to continuing to get built at a rate which will eventually get overbuilt. Market rate housing needs to really drop in price significantly. So where are you going to find the way to do that? And fortunately, we're actually delivering 55-plus product, one of the only large master plans to be doing that. But we continue to see that as a huge opportunity to meet the needs of our seniors, which want to move back here or stay here. So I think it's about understanding a lot of components and being focused on delivering just that right answer to the right people.
Thank you. So now the panel is sequestered because, mostly because they can't get off these stools without a stepladder. So they were gracious enough to, we're going to open it up for audience Q&A. Ariana has found the ONC Forum lightsaber, and she will go around and raise your hand. And for those of you in the audience, the protocol, a question is a phrase or a sentence followed by a question mark. It's not a speech. So please adhere to that. I believe Jenna raised her hand.
So Paul, I'm interested to hear more. You're talking about 23 units to an acre in this development. So this just piques my curiosity about what kind of innovative design elements you are incorporating into a project like that to make it attractive for Orange County buyers.
So it's a long story, but I'll try to make it short. It really has been about a 3-year journey to work cooperatively with the County of Orange. We have a great relationship with them, been doing this for 60-plus years. But basically, we had to go back and we work with them to get alternative development standards. Allows us to either reduce the amount of guest parking, setback between houses, architectural executions, all the components that will actually allow us to get density. So what we're really bringing to the market would be what I would call for sale apartments, but done really well. So we'll start at 700-800 square feet, work our way up to probably the largest unit in the 2,000 square foot range. We're doing, 6-foot setbacks. These are all things that everybody kind of would go, they're not going to want that. But it's trade-offs. It's trade-offs to you own a house. Most of our product will be 60% will be under 500,000. So we'll reach a buyer market that really isn't here. We're still doing the amenity program that we are known to do down in South County. So it's about lifestyle. So as we get the people and the housing units more dense, we're not going away from, great pocket parks, grand parks where they get to recreate. All of that still has to come into the planning to make the execution. We're excited about it. We think it's the right timing. Early 22, if the market is really in early recovery, I think we'll be received well. Architecturally, we're doing something very fresh and innovative. We're paying attention to all the pieces that we're kind of known to pay attention to.
So I know we have some members of city councils and city representatives too that may want to question.
Is that the mayor of Dayton?
The private sector for a while has been trying to tackle this problem. How do you see the government entities focusing and trying to come into partnership more with the private sector? And during redevelopment, that was when the cities that were into redevelopment, they formed good alliances with private developers and moving forward on stuff and streamlining stuff. We haven't seen that since the illumination of that. So how do you see that taking shape?
I do think there are some examples right now in Orange County. I was a joint author along with Tom Daly on AB 48, was it 448? I don't remember all the bill numbers. But that is to encourage public-private support for permanent supportive housing. Now, again, that requires the state to invest as well as private entities. So if you want to say the bank account on that is pretty slim. But I think as projects are moved forward where there really is an idea, I think there'll be more people who will want to invest. As you know, there have been a big focus on shelters right now, and that certainly is a temporary solution. And it could end up being not the right solution if we aren't building the permanent supportive housing. meaning that they won't be in a shelter temporary, they will be much longer. So we have to start getting that permanent supportive housing units built. There is a model out there with OC Be-Well. Does anybody know about Be-Well? There's a few people too. And this is actually a partnership with mental health providers, with hospital association, with housing people, and it's really to start the conversation about when we have people who are homeless, how do we get them into some type of immediate support, whether it be health, mental health, but then what's the next step? So just very quickly to wrap up, we have, and again, this might be one of those things that you kind of go like, oh no, why is she saying that? But we have 118 acres of land in Costa Mesa, the state land where the Fairview Hospital is. There is a piece of legislation that I moved forward that actually changed from a piece of legislation and was put into the budget, and that is to house up to 200 individuals with mental health illness, not as a shelter, not as a any type of temporary placement, but would have wraparound services. So looking at that piece of land, 118 acres, as a possible future site for multiple types of housing, which could be not only affordable, but market, and using that market type of housing to fund the affordable housing. So starting to look at those type of strategies where you have multiple types of housing, including mental health types of housing, which we don't have very many placements. So I think there's some creative opportunities.
I think, yes, I'm going to contribute to that. I think one of the other things that local government can do is also work on your general plans. As I mentioned, a lot of the legislation that was enacted by the legislature over the last couple of years talks about providing exemptions for projects that are consistent with the general plan and zoning. And so the more a city can do some advanced planning and put, whether it's through overlays or specific plans, and provide that foundation for housing to occur, the easier it will be for a developer or builder who comes in to utilize your environmental documents and to tier from them so that every project doesn't require a brand new EIR, and to really provide, work into your zoning and your general plan some of the flexibility in the development standards that Paul talked about, that the ranch has been able to benefit from. So that, again, everything doesn't require a variance or a conditional use permit, and that to really think hard about your advanced planning in that regard to help, using a very bad pun, to help pave the way for additional housing to be built.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Assemblywoman, you have mentioned auxiliary dwelling units. We've had that, those laws have been in effect for several years now, but a lot of cities do not encourage it, do not want it, have not gone forward with it. What can we see being done in order to force the issue with the state, the cities to follow state law? Because they change everything from being a 1,200 square foot possibility down to 750 or 600, and those are not economically feasible in a lot of cases, especially if you have a 10,000 square foot lot. Why do you need to be made to only put on 600 square feet?
Well, some of the new laws that have not taken effect yet, they will take effect January 1. They will, if you want to say, supersede the local government. There are a few laws that are more encouraging. So, for example, there's been a study or an audit done on permit fees for ADUs showing that some of the fees are so high that it just doesn't make any sense to build them. And so the higher the fee, the lower the ADU building. So, for example, Fullerton has exempted their fee completely this last year. I don't know that they'll redo it for another year, but they have seen an increase. But some of the units, as far as a 2-unit with so many parking, if you're half a mile away, your parking is exempted. So there are definitely incentives in these new ADU laws. So your local cities should definitely be prepared to understand what the laws are. And I think that if you have constituents that are interested, they definitely can bring that to their attention. But we're hoping to see more people choose to do that, especially with the owner occupied. It used to be that you had to live in, if you want to say, the front unit, and then you could do the back unit. But now it's up to 10 years that you don't have to live there. So I think, and again, when we say granny house, we can talk about millennials again. It doesn't matter who. It's, it could be a student if you're next to a college. But again, using existing single-family homes for another unit.
Okay, we have a question from the back, one of our ULI leaders.
Just to push a little further on the last question, because I was reading into that a little different twist, and that is, there's been a lot of discussion that the state there'd be a carrot like you're talking about, but there'd also be a stick that would be coming from Sacramento, that if the cities didn't engage actively in pursuing the RHNA quotas, that something very bad was going to happen. But I haven't heard lately where that stands. Are there any punitive actions associated with any of these bills, or are the cities going to continue to, have various levels of intention in actually achieving the goals?
Well, I think the SCAG numbers over probably since they began, the RHNA numbers, there has always been a number given, but I don't believe most cities actually attain that. Is that true? That you're given a certain number, and I don't know that there's any city that attains the number that's given. That certainly shouldn't mean like, hey, they gave us 10,000, but we really don't have to do it, so let's not do it. But I think, trying to get there in the best way possible. But as far as the stick, there has been legislation that was not moved forward, and I think that's probably the bigger threat than current legislation. So an example is SB 50, which was a Scott Wiener bill that did not get out of the Senate, and that was in essence to say, by transportation areas, you would have to build much higher density. And there was several members that felt that that went too far. So as crazy as Sacramento may seem to you all the time, there is a certain swath of some middle of the road members that kind of say, okay, that's taking all of the local authority away. But there's also trying to push some of this legislation back to say this, goes too far, like when you say with fees and things like that. So what is the incentive? Because you were right, there was a bill, or at least the discussion of having prevailing wage in residential. And again, one of the things is Sacramento is like a novella in the sense that you kind of hear things starting to come around, and a lot of times before it even gets drafted, things can be pushed back by coming out early and saying, you're not going to support something. So for example, Prop 13 has always talked about the individual property, not the corporate, and pretty much that gets pushed away because people don't want to go there. But now I believe on the ballot is the corporate one. Split roll. So, but again, in my case, I've come out early and said that I'm not going to support that. So sometimes what you'll do is they'll start to count. And if they see enough people early enough not supporting something like that, there will be a group that will back away. But the carrot and the stick is pretty heavy right now. I know they did sue Huntington Beach, but I think that I'm not sure of what's happening. I think that was just throwing a little, hey, we're watching.
Yeah, I think Two things. Number one, SB 50, I understand, is a two-year bill, so it is coming back in the next session. So I think everybody should probably pay attention to that because it will come back in some form. And then in terms of the stick, none of the legislation really has a stick in it, Steve, but what they do have is the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, has the ability to review and certify every local jurisdiction's housing element. And if there isn't provision made in those housing elements, you can run the risk of not getting your housing element certified. And that's going to throw your general plan and the ability to approve projects into chaos. So I think that is probably the only stick that's out there. I mean, there's also been the litigation, but I think it's that's probably on a one-on-one situation, but the HCD certification is probably the biggest stick that the state currently has.
But the carrot is a lot of one-time funding for individual cities to apply for to not only support your local planning, but also even for building and so forth. And it's actually very crucial dollars, especially if you're in an area that needs to build some type of temporary shelters, and that can be huge. For example, the North Spa, that service provider area, which is North Orange County, they received almost $13 million, and that's about 11 cities to build a shelter in Placentia and in Buena Park. And without those funds, they were still going to have to do that according to Judge Carter's decision. So if cities are willing to work together collaboratively, they can apply together. And we've often heard, well, Orange County doesn't get their fair share. The truth is, when Orange County has applied, they have more often than not received funding, and there continues to be more opportunities to receive this funding coming up even in the next 6 months. So I definitely encourage you to apply. There's actually a tracker on their website that shows the cities that have applied, and if you look, it's very clear who's applying and who's not applying, and there's a lot of support. I'm happy to work with any city, whether it be North County or South County, and we've actually had HCD down to walk cities through the process to apply. But that is one area we're going to continue to work on, which is making the applications more streamlined, because they are a lot of work.
We have one final question from another ULI leader.
Okay. Just one quick follow-up question to Paul about the lady's question about what's 23 to the acre residential product really look like with the 6-foot setbacks and reduced parking. Are you having to go to any parking structures? Is this a 3-story apartment, flats, or?
So no underground parking, it's all surface, but it'll start at 3-story, so we'll have actually walk up, I'd really call them for sale apartments, and work our way into duplex, very small lot, single family detached, like 2,500 square foot lots. So, and that's where we're really plotting 6-foot setbacks. We got some reduction on guest parking, which allowed that to work more favorably. So our biggest house is really around 2,000 square feet. That's still on a single-family detached lot at probably 3,500 square feet. So it'll look a lot different than what we've done in the past. But I think amenitizing it correctly, walkability, we're running our own to address the VTM issue. We've been running Ranch Ride, an inter-community transportation system that, with the help of the County of Orange, we're also doing some transportation out to the surrounding cities. So we're kind of ahead of the game on a few things to, I think, make livability work, even in that tight density.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and, Paul, you're going to take it from here?
I will. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We want to thank the panel, Paul, Sharon, Susan, Mike. Thank you very much. What a great panel. Before we conclude today's program, I would also like to thank each and every one of you for joining us. What a great way to end the year. Great packed house today. And we also want you to join us for the conversation in the new year. We have some spectacular plans we're looking to unfold as we begin to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Orange County Forum. Next up will be the State of the County. That luncheon will take place on Tuesday, January the 21st, from 11:30 to 1:30 at the Hilton Irvine. Again, January 21st, State of the County. And if you aren't already there, please join us on social media to stay up to date with all things OC Forum. Thank you, and have a great OC Day.
On the bottom, a little room, walk up 3 floors.